President Biden has said that if China attacks Taiwan, the U.S. would defend them militarily. But given China's intense armed forces modernization, is that even possible? Joining me is Michael O'Hanlon. He's the Philip Knight Chair in Defense and Strategy at the Brookings Institution. Mike, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Mimi. Nice to be with you.
So what is American policy vis-a-vis coming to Taiwan's military defense?
Well, it's a great question with no simple answer. Maybe the easiest way to start is to say historically, we had such dominance over China, even around an island that's 100 miles from the Chinese coast and thousands of miles from our mainland and thousands of miles from our nearest naval base in Hawaii or even Guam. And yet things have changed. And now militarily, it's a much more even and tough call as to what would happen there. Strategically, getting to your point about what our policy is, we still have this so-called strategic ambiguity stance where we do not commit in advance to defend Taiwan no matter what. We say it would all depend on how the crisis or conflict began, who caused it, whose fault it seemed to be. And the goal here has been historically to try to discourage Taiwan from declaring independence or taking any other action that would make war more likely.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, what's the purpose for that? Why not just come out and say, this is what we'll do in order to deter Chinese action?
Well, historically, the reason has been what I just said, and it still has a certain applicability because many in Taiwan would like to be independent, and also they might judge the military balance differently than I do. They might acknowledge that China's getting stronger, but they might still think there's a window where the United States could defend them successfully or where China wouldn't think it's ready to attack. And if they declare independence during that window, they create a fait accompli. So that would be the concern. We would want to discourage that because we don't think that the odds of increased war, are worth the benefit here of Taiwan sort of resolving the issue once and for all and becoming independent. So it's dual deterrence, trying to deter two different parties, either one of them from starting a war. Many people think this is now an obsolete policy, however, given China's strength, and we better be more clear. But my point is, it's one thing to say what we would do, it's something else to do it. And it's not obvious that we would win in any and all scenarios around Taiwan.
And that's the real question here. Does the U.S. have the military capability to defend Taiwan?
We have the capability to maybe win and maybe lose and probably have a long, tough fight, and maybe that sounds like I'm just punting, but we've all been surprised, or almost all of us, by how the Russia-Ukraine conflict has gone. Most of us were surprised by how the Iraq war went. War is unpredictable. It's much more unpredictable than a sporting event because in sports, at least, you have a time duration, agreed rules, and the same number of people on each side. And you still get wildly, divergent outcomes with the same two teams playing different games. Here we're talking about, a kind of combat which obviously raises the greatest stakes for the parties, which involves technologies that often haven't been used before the same way because technology is always advancing, that can expand or contract in time duration or geography. So war is inherently an unpredictable business. And when the two parties are relatively evenly matched in terms of resources, that is even more the case. Now, we still outspend China 3-1 on defense. So you could say, well, isn't that a big US advantage? Yes, to an extent, but we also have responsibilities, of course, in Europe and the broader Middle East. And so the China Western Pacific theater is really only one of our three main concerns. And if you look at it that way, it sort of makes the playing field more or less level in terms of resource expenditure by the two sides.
Well, let me ask you specifically about a blockade. Could the U.S. break a Chinese blockade of Taiwan?
I don't know. I've spent now 17,000 words, in other words, sort of a quarter of a book in a long article trying to assess that question. And I conclude that there are assumptions and scenarios by which the answer would be yes, other equally plausible assumptions and paths by which the answer might be no. A lot of it's going to depend on whose satellite network survives better and who's able to communicate better, because a lot of this is going to be, attacking ships, or keeping ships protected. And then, of course, our anti-submarine warfare capability would be crucial because China would probably use its submarines to try to attack merchant ships and maybe U.S. Navy ships in this kind of a scenario. But the waters around the Taiwan Strait, around the South China Sea, and this whole area are difficult. It's hard to know exactly how well we would do at finding those Chinese submarines. It's hard to know how well they would do at getting information to target ships from their own satellites and airplanes. And so when I play it out and make some plausible assumptions, but try to vary those assumptions, reflecting the uncertainty of the problem, I conclude that there's really no way to be sure who would win.
How big of a defense budget is the Pentagon going to need to get to the point of China not even wanting to think about it? You just said, you know, we outspend them 3-1 already.
Yeah, I'm glad you asked that way, because I don't think there is an answer to that question. And, you know, there is a lot of vigorous and important debate about whether the 2023 defense budget should be something in the range of closer to 750 billion or 800 billion or even more than that, largely with inflation being a big question mark. But I think even if we spend $1 trillion a year on our military, most of these core uncertainties would remain, and China might very well choose to spend more as well. They could. They're spending a smaller fraction of their gross domestic product on their military than we are. And so I think it's entirely doable for them to ramp that up. The main problem is the state of technology. It's not so much whether we outspend them 3-1, 4-1. It's that both sides have quiet submarines. Both sides have vulnerable satellites and means to attack the other side's satellites. Both sides have very precise long-range missiles and are building a lot more. And so when you put all these things together and you integrate them into a complex, you know, kill chain that hasn't really been battle tested and can't really be battle tested the way it would be in an actual war, I think you just have too many inherent uncertainties. You can try to minimize and narrow those uncertainties. You can do a classified analysis. I don't think, though, that you could really be confident in predicting who's going to win. Really
quick, Michael, is Taiwan worth it?
Well, 23 million people is a lot of people, but it's nowhere near the preponderance of, you know, the populations of our major allies. They produce a lot of semiconductors, but over time we could diversify. I don't think that the fate of 23 million people is worth World War III or nuclear war. But I don't want to sell those people out either. So we're going to have to find some better deterrent posture that involves economics as much as military tools.
Agreed. Michael, thank you so much for being on the program.
Thank you, Mimi.
Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, give it a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel so you don't miss out on any future Government Matters interviews.